interference. Does this document provide positive proof of the existence of UFOs?
Come, Lavrenti. The world is changing and we must protect the Soviet Union.
The world is always in a state of transition, Mr. Premier.
There is word that the Americans have recovered a UFO near Roswell, New Mexico.
Yes, Mr. Premier. They're also trying to find out if the British embassy in Washington has been infiltrated by the Soviet spies.
These investigations by the Americans could put our agents in very difficult positions.
Possibly.
We have 5 Cambridge University graduates in position to obtain specific sensitive information about American and British projects. The British Embassy in Washington is the center of our espionage activities.
And Donald McLean has been our best agent inside the embassy.
I want you to contact Guy Burgess and have him put pressure on McLean to obtain this information that we are looking for.
Yes, Mr. Premier.
I must know if the Americans have obtained a UFO outside Roswell, New Mexico.
The FBI, as well as British intelligence, has been all over the embassy, Mr. Premier. We must move with caution or suffer the consequences.
Nevertheless, Lavrenti, we must take some risks if we are to protect and defend the Soviet Union against these American imperialists.
The Cambridge 5 has performed admirably, Mr. Premier. I'm sure they'll get the information we need.
Yes, but it is your responsibility, Lavrenti. And you know what the penalty is for failure.
The same as it always has been, Mr. Premier. A bullet to the head.
Yes, and your position will not save you.
I will keep it in mind, Mr. Premier.
The British Embassy in Washington would become the focal point of Stalin's espionage activities, and the Cambridge 5 would carry out his diabolical plan through his KGB chief, Lavrenti Beria. The Cambridge 5 were all graduates from Cambridge University. They came to the United States to spy for Stalin. Meetings between Soviet Premier Josef Stalin and KGB chief Lavrenti Beria would have to be considered logical extensions of events that were taking place. The Cambridge 5 spy team was the most successful Soviet espionage team ever assembled on American soil. All 5 of them, Soviet Premier Josef Stalin and KGB chief Lavrenti Beria, might have become concerned that their agents might be exposed, so a meeting discussing that possibility would have taken place.
You know, Lavrenti, just look at some of these young riders. They are the future of our equestrian team.
Yes, Mr. Premier. They're so young and so disciplined.
Someday they will represent the Soviet Union at the Olympic Games.
Yes, and perhaps even bring home the gold.
What news, Lavrenti?
It is my understanding from various sources that Cambridge 5 mission may be in jeopardy.
In what way, Lavrenti? Have they been found out by British or American authorities?
My sources tell me that the Americans are very close to breaking our code, Mr. Premier.
You know, the last thing in the world I need right now is a confrontation with the West. Ever since the end of the World War and the division of Germany, the West is looking for opportunities to exploit public opinion.
I know, Mr. Premier. It is not good turn of events. We have to act quickly. They will look to usurp your authority.
The Cambridge 5 must not be taken alive.
What are you suggesting, Mr. Premier? Assassination?
No one is indispensable, Lavrenti. You, of all people, should know that. They are not in a position to argue the point. We must prevent Donald McLean and the others from being arrested by the FBI and turned over to British authorities at all costs.
I realize that they're not indispensable, Mr. Premier, but perhaps there is a much better way to handle the situation instead of hiring an assassin to fire those lethal rounds.
And what is that, Lovett?
Have them defect. Once they learn about their position, they could not refuse. I'm sure they would want to leave rather than face arrest or possibly more. They understand what must happen to them if the British intelligence get to them first.
Perhaps. But you know, Lavrenti, in the old days, our methods never failed us. A bullet to the head, and our problems went away.
Yes, Mr. Premier, a bullet to the head. But the Cambridge 5 possess very valuable information we made an investment in over the many years they were entrenched in the United States.
Very well, Lavrenti. Defection. But I will hold you personally responsible for the success of this mission. Rest assured that I have not abandoned the old methods of dealing with pressing problems. And your position will not save you.
I am well aware of that, Mr. Premier. I will contact Guy Burgess and have them put my plan into operation. I will sleep a lot better once the Cambridge 5 safely in Canada.
Make sure they leave nothing behind that can implicate the Soviet Union. There should be no evidence that can link me to the events in Kelso or the British Embassy in Washington.
Of course, Mr. Premier. All documents and communications will be destroyed.
Very well, Lavrenti. Put your plan in motion.
Yes, Mr. Premier.
Once Stalin found out that the Americans were getting closer and closer to breaking the Soviet code, which would expose all of their agents operating in the United States, this meeting would be a logical extension of events.
If you wanted to prove that a UFO crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, but you didn't have access to either the remnants of the UFO or the alien bodies, what would you do? How could you prove that such an event ever took place? A daunting task. It has long been rumored that President Truman made a secret trip to Wright Field in Ohio in September of 1947 to see what the military had recovered from the Roswell crash site. Since it was a secret trip and no one knew about it, if you could